Good morning, everybody. My name is Stephanie McCowett. I am the marketing manager here at Datamark. Welcome to our fourth webinar of the year, my GIS Data's Journey to Next Generation 911. Please, if you guys have any questions, you might have noticed by now you are on mute. That's just to make sure that it's for audio quality purposes. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, go ahead and use the Q&A section or use the chat, and we'll make sure to address all of those questions and comments as they come in. Now, I am excited to introduce you guys to Jeff Ledbetter. He is our client success manager for Datamark. So you guys may have seen him on other webinars, may have seen him at different conferences. So without further ado, Jeff, you want to take it away?
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Glad to be here with everybody. I am going to pause my camera just to be sure that I don't have any bandwidth issues because it feels slow. Again, really appreciate everybody's time today. And I'm looking forward to talking, I hope everybody can see my screen, talking about GIS Data's Journey to NG911. And you know, we've done a really good job. I think everybody would agree over the last 2 or 3 years or more of doing a lot of webinars and helpful web content that that is in the weeds of the question. And you may have joined today thinking that you were kind of going to get some more down at the operational level advice about making your GIS data ready for NG911. But I'm going to disappoint you if that's what you expected, just a bit here. And I want to take the conversation up to, you know, the 35,000, 50,000 foot level and kind of get into some concepts here that transcend the operational concepts of what do I do with my GIS data to make it NG911 ready, and talk about really your GIS data's journey from its very inception and creation, its birth, if you will, all the way through to beyond NG911 and to as is appropriate for our focus. We will focus on public safety, but I want you to imagine as we talk about this journey of your GIS data's your GIS data's journey. I want you to think about it to include NG911, to include other public safety applications, and even beyond that, to include other business uses that are very prevalent in GIS out there today that you as clients, as prospective clients, as just interested parties joining into the webinar here might be using your GIS data for today. You might have a plan to create your GIS data to be used in some other ways, you know, down the road in the future. And maybe you just get some ideas about what that possibly looks like moving forward with your GIS data. So I want to get a little bit philosophical and conceptual with today's talk, and not so much operational or in the weeds of GIS nerdery. But you know, I've been having a lot of conversations. I'll move the slide to this next slide. I've been having a lot of conversations, you know, about you know, not just getting your GIS data ready for NG911, but things like indoor mapping and 3D mapping and Z-axis data in 911 circles. And how is the transitional state of NG911 going to handle that? How is an end state of NG911 going to handle that? And I keep coming back to, in that conversation, sometimes feeling a little bit overwhelmed that maybe we're getting the cart before the horse, right? In some of these future conversations. Really, what I think my gut is acknowledging is the fact that we're talking about preparing GIS data for NG911 on a broad scale is not done most places, right? It's not in a state of readiness, GIS NG911 readiness. But in some places it is, right? And so in some places it's an appropriate conversation to start thinking about, well, what's next? I have this really great base data, address points, road center lines, public safety boundaries. I got really great base data. What can I do next? Well, maybe the answer is I need to think about increasing officer safety and public safety by having detailed indoor maps, by having tools to sustainably manage those indoor maps. Maybe I need to start thinking about having some 3D extrusions of my buildings with those very same indoor floor plans layered over them. Maybe I can get to that level of sophistication. That would be really useful, right, if we did that. And so I want to kind of talk about the concept of readiness and useful, or being ready for NG911 and useful, not only for NG911, but things beyond. What would be the things beyond? Well, they would, as I mentioned, certainly be public safety applications of that GIS data that might include things like indoor mapping and 3D mapping. Really cool, stuff that you would see in the movies that can quickly track and locate somebody and give really good graphical context to that location data that would help a dispatcher, that would help a first responder, that would help a citizen responder, maybe do great things in terms of saving lives, maybe do great things in terms of keeping places, preventing damage to life and property. That is the ultimate goal of all the things that we do in the public safety industry. It's certainly the ultimate goal of us here at Datamark and Michael Baker International, even broadly, Michael Baker International. Maybe you want to use the same data. Maybe it's really useful for ensuring that there is not a digital divide in your community, that your broadband needs are met. I know that in our broader Michael Baker International organization, we have a great team of folks that work on closing that digital divide with GIS data and how that happens. They're to the level of expertise in that topic as we are in public safety, and they need useful GIS data really along similar lines to NG911 does as well to do that job. And so I want you to be thinking about ready, right, which is a state of base data being in good shape, complete and accurate for its use in NG911 or a broadband assessment system or indoor floor mapping or whatever it is, but being ready again, in our context here at Datamark, NG911 ready and base and ready. Up against and beyond ready then becomes useful. I've got this really great data that meets the basic need, and then I'm able to even go above and beyond it. And so with that in mind, I want to kind of talk a little bit about your GIS data's journey. And think really, let's go all the way back. Where did your GIS data come from? If you're in public safety and you're thinking about NG911 readiness, your GIS data was more than likely created for other purposes. It was probably, created sometime in the 50s or 60s, maybe the 70s, by somebody on a heads-up display. A heads-up digitizing setup, maybe in the 80s, right? They worked for USGS and they were doing Tiger data, or they worked for a Department of Transportation somewhere, and they were trying to create a high performance management system for highways, things like that. Maybe your address point data started off as somebody's direct mailing database back in the day that made sure that when mailed advertisements or catalogs and things like that in your mailbox really mattered to somebody's business of selling stuff or marketing stuff. These are all common places that GIS data, road center lines and address points specifically, have roots in these things. And that's why when you think about transition to NG911, that's why there's so much work to move them from the state they're in, where they were built for transportation purposes or marketing purposes or any other kind of public works or planning purposes in a government enterprise. And they have a lot of work, because maybe to the point of number 2 here, maybe they were maintained and maybe they weren't, right? They certainly weren't maintained well in most cases. Some cases they were maintained well, but they were, again, maintained for purposes that weren't to the level of precision and accuracy necessary to transition to NG911, which comes stage 3. And again, in our particular view and application of this data, transition to NG911, all of a sudden we realize now that these data that are built for other purposes are very useful and provide a track to run on in order to get to where we need to have GIS data in NG911 that's complete and accurate and locally authoritative for each jurisdiction. But we also know that in order to get to that point, we have a lot of that point being number 4, right? The initial NG911 readiness. We have a lot of work to do. We have to change our attributes. We have to change our schemas. We have to add attributes. We have to add records. Address points is a great example where most address point data sets just aren't complete or complete enough to do a good job of giving a unique representation of every civic address location in a given authoritative area. And that there's a lot of work to get to that point of initial NG911 readiness. And then while you're in the throes of that effort in that transition, along come conversations about, wow, we can really do cool stuff with 3D maps and extruded building shapes and indoor maps. We can do a lot of cool things out in the field across this FirstNet public safety responders broadband network. Wow, they've got all these awesome apps that now work on P25 radios. They're digital radios that aren't just carrying voice signals, but are carrying data signals as well. Those are all cool things that could potentially distract from, for the GIS data provider, for the GIS data owner and steward for NG911, that couldn't provide a little bit of distraction. What does this mean? Do I have to now, start diverting resources away from this initial NG911 data readiness into creating floor plans, indoor mapping, into creating 3D shapes of buildings? And it's easy to get caught up in sort of the marketing machines that are out there. And we do our best here at Datamark to not get too caught up in that, or not to froth people up for the sake of selling you things. But I have to say that in our industry, there are some people that find a sales opportunity and start marketing towards that. And it winds up distracting the conversation, and it distracts particularly people that are kind of on the edge of the community, like GIS data providers, who's really focused on good GIS data. And they have their public safety partners come to them and say, I need your GIS data, but it has to go this way. And they started working on that, but they don't really understand all of the operational impacts of indoor mapping or 3D mapping, other things like that. Just giving those as good examples that are hot topics today. Z-axis data in the public safety, in the 911 call flow, and what comes in, or what does it mean, and how does a 911 call taker, dispatcher deal with kind of all these different things coming at them. And you get pulled into a meeting. Oh, this guy wants to do indoor floor plans, and you're like, wait, I'm really struggling with the resources that I have to meet your needs in terms of initial NG911 data readiness. How can I also do these other things with limited resources, right? So you have to start making choices. And so I want to think about that in that context of ready versus useful. And the whole point of what I want you to take away from this today is that you really need to be strategic about not only your resources, but your attention span is a resource, right? Be strategic about making sure that you can ingest and take in information that's out there in the world, make sense of it, and still be effective and efficient and flexible with your traveled path, your journey, your data's journey to that initial 911 data readiness, as well as the opportunities to create useful data for other things as well. And so a couple of takeaways here is that focus on the basics, right? Make efficient and flexible workflows. If you have efficient and flexible workflows that will not only support the initial readiness of NG911, GIS data for NG911, but will also support the extension of that data into other cool things, such as indoor mapping, 3D mapping, giving context to z-axis values. And in order to do that, to the second point, education is critical, right? I think I can say with confidence that here at Datamark, we've staked our reputation on being trusted advisors that understand the scene and can educate you as a technical professional, as a non-technical professional, to be a part of this effort to bring on board to public safety good and efficient GIS data for NG911 and for other things, both ready and useful. But there's lots of sources out there of information and education. And one of the most critical things, and this is why we take the approach we do, is for you to be educated to make good and sound decisions about where to put your resources and how to prioritize efforts. Now that being said, right, and what I hope what you take away from what I'm saying is don't let the shiny thing distract you from doing what you need to do to create data that's ready. Don't allow the attraction to the useful ends and the useful applications of really cool stuff detract from your focus on getting the base data in place. But when opportunity knocks, right, answer the door, because those resources, there are opportunities, great opportunities in different places, different ways, but there are great opportunities out there with, for good reasons that we need to be focused on. School facilities, for instance, with indoor mapping, because it increases not only citizen safety, but increases officer and firefighter safety to have those internal contexts of buildings be easily navigable and to have them be in many places at once so that they can provide that common locational language that might be necessary to guide responders via a dispatcher's voice over our radio to a particular place in a particular room of a particular building. So there's some opportunities to do things like create indoor mapping, to start thinking about and executing some strategies that would give you really good and useful 3D data for buildings, not only indoors, but outdoors as well. Those opportunities, when those opportunities knock, open the door and explore them. And if there's a chance to leverage the base data that is ready, or even getting base data ready, and there's a way to leverage that useful state to get your base built and your readiness achieved, work smarter, not harder. Go out there and take advantage of those opportunities. And, as part of the struggle and frustration that I hear in the industry from people too, is that progress is never linear, right? I get going down the path that I think is going to get me to that ready state. I'm on the path, I'm making good progress, and all of a sudden I get these other requirements thrown at me, or this other thing that needs to happen. Again, using my good base data that is ready, or getting to that readiness in order to leverage it and extend it into something that is useful. So you have to sort of be able to temper your frustration of that progress, and recognize and appreciate the fact that progress is never linear. I wish I had a good graphic, the graphic that's in my head right now, of a trend chart where might measure with a big red line ups and downs of, say, progress in your retirement account or something like that. And if some of your retirement account is tied to the stock market, it's going to have really ups, good high highs. It's going to have some lows. It's going to have, but as long as you're trending upward in that retirement account as time progresses and your time in your career progresses to where
Hey, Jeff, are you on? You cut out. Hi, everyone. Oh, Jeff's back. I was just going to let everybody know that we had just run into some technical difficulties, but maybe this is a great time to go over any questions that anybody has. So does anybody have any questions or thoughts that they'd like to drop in the chat or the Q&A while we regain audio?
hey, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, sorry. That bandwidth concern apparently was quite legitimate there. What was the last thing you heard me say?
That is a great question. So can you share your slides again? Because I know we were on our
Oh, yes.
last.
Yeah, I guess you would have lost my screen as well, wouldn't you? Here we go. You see it now?
Yep. Oh, progress is never linear.
Yeah, did you hear me talking about the retirement account?
I think that was one of the last things that we heard. Yep.
Okay, so the whole point of that is that if you're making good progress, there are ups, there are downs, but as long as you're trending in the right direction, I think that really applies here to the conversation about your GIS status journey, to NG911 and into other useful public safety things, but also other business uses as well. So that's the content that I had prepared, but I really hope that we could spark up a little bit of a conversation, a little bit of a chat if you want, or come off of mute. And let's have a little therapy session. Has anybody struggled with kind of being overwhelmed at the idea that I'm supposed to not only create good, ready, useful data for NG911, but now I'm being asked to, do indoor floor plans or 3D mapping and things like that? Yeah, the retirement analogy. Yep, good. Don't leave me hanging here. Chat me up. Open up your mics if you want to. And if not, then I've introduced some thoughts to you that I hope that you'll think about and be willing to discuss amongst yourselves and with me as you see fit to do so. A little overwhelmed. Yeah, there you go. Struggling to get my data ready, but have not heard of indoor or 3D mapping. Could you better explain? Certainly, yeah, would be happy to. So there's a big conversation out there in the public safety industry about the usefulness of, or I'm sorry, I should back up even further. The delivery of what's called Z-axis information. GIS people can catch this concept real easily, right? And I'm just going to back up my slide to this conversation to kind of demonstrate this. The idea that there's an X, Y, and Z axis for 3D things, right? And so for years, decades, the wireless industry has been able to give some sort of X and Y location as to the location of a caller with what are known as uncertainty, and confidence factors that basically say this XY coordinate is the location that we've derived of the caller within a certain distance. That's the uncertainty value, say 50 meters. Within, in other words, within 50 meters, we're certain that this location is accurate within 50 meters or 10 meters or whatever the value is, and a confidence of 85%, 92%, things like that. And that's some voodoo magic that happens on the wireless provider's side that comes back and says that. And so for a long time, call takers, dispatchers have been trained how to interpret that XY location with an uncertainty, with the certainty range and a confidence factor, right? Now the wireless industry is able to send the Z coordinate as well. And so if you've been keeping up at all with NENA standards and documents recently released, was what's called an REQ, or a requirements document, about how 3D GIS should be used or considered or constructed for use in 911 and public safety. And it's got some really great concepts in it that I really recommend GIS people go out and take a look at, so that they can understand how data should be visualized in turn to help interpret 3D data, visualized basically as a cylinder, so that they can say, I have a height above ellipsoid value of -72 within an uncertainty range of 50 meters, that which, 50 meters is 150 feet or so, could be a few stories worth of range. It could be anywhere between floors 2 and floor 7. So they want to visualize this as kind of a cylinder. And so what can I do with that location and that cylinder if it doesn't have context? And so that naturally leads to a discussion of, if this is a call made from an indoor location, a map of the floor plan of that floor plan that we think that caller is on, based on this 3D location with uncertainty and confidence factor, what it looks like, not only to interpret where that caller's calling from, but also to help first responders get a little bit of context and navigate inside more complicated indoor spaces than they've ever been able to do. Well, the technology is out there now, right? The technology is capable of creating really stunning indoor maps, really stunning visuals that could help a dispatcher guide over a radio, or a first responder see on a tablet out in the field an indoor map. And so there's a lot of uses of good uses of technology that can create this indoor map, that can give it 3D context, that can take that Z-axis value and kind of pinpoint the location and give visual ways to interpret what that location means out in the real world. That's all like super useful on the side of ready and versus useful, right? And I don't want to actually build a conceptual framework of ready versus useful. Rather, it is useful to extend the ready data into these cool applications. And so, comes back to the GIS person to go, oh, okay, we've seen this vision that's been built by different people that have the vision, right, of taking good GIS data that's ready for NG911 and extending it by adding 3D context to it, by adding indoor context. And how is that displayed and shown and made useful as a visual context for an operational 911 call, or an operational set of first responders that are responding to an emergency? So that's kind of some of the concept that I'm referring to there. And the struggle that I've been having conversations with people about is, I'm really doing the best I can do to even get to that ready state, but I'm having to stop maybe take away some of my resources, my brain resources, my financial resources, my technology resources, away from getting to that ready state in order to start thinking about longer term useful things that I don't think the struggle with the priority of that. And I think that's the discussion, right? How do I cut through marketing talk out in the industry and see what is really convenient, what is really achievable, along with getting to that ready state, extending into the useful state. Looks like a
So
couple of conversations going on in the chat now.
that's what I was just gonna say to you, Jeff. It sounds like a lot of people are kind of starting to embark on adopting some 3D GIS layers and potentially even indoor maps. So John is saying that it can be challenging when you're a regional aggregator, have expectations coming at you for new 3D and indoor data to be available, but you're not the local data creation and maintenance
Yeah.
agent.
Yeah, that's legitimate, right? How are you going to extend data that you're not the data owner of? Data governance, let me tell you, this is a GIS nerd topic, right? Data governance is something that the people who sit in front of a console and dispatch and call take, frankly, don't care about, don't know about, don't have the framework to even absorb. Why does it matter who owns the data versus who is an aggregator or a steward of that data? But yet it's really critical at the operational GIS level that you understand what John points out here is that I don't own the data. I can't actually create that data, but if somebody has it, I maybe can bring it together and put it in a context that's useful in a 911 setting. That's another layer of struggle.
I think Scott also says, I think one of the hardest parts is utilizing the same basic data sets for multiple purposes. For instance, curating an RCL data set for normal existing city workflows, NG911, AVL, linear reference systems for asset managements, all utilize the same basic underlying data, but the schemas can be drastically different. You don't want to recreate the wheel, but you have to roll back pretty far sometimes.
Yeah, Scott, you're touching my nerd heart with that one there. I actually just had some conversations with a client in Florida this week or last week it was, where the reality of managing and breaking up road center line segments for a 911 use really has come to bear against other business uses for that same road center line data, where they're doing things like pavement management or asset management or permitting systems that need it broken in a different way because they care about, in a pavement management system, for instance, they care about the condition of the pavement, not where the addresses are. So they don't even care if it has an address range. But yet if I go and break the center line to represent the segment of pavement that goes from good to bad, then I also potentially have to adjust in address ranges if it's all in the same data set. This is especially in larger organizations with big data sets, it's a present need because of the pavement management demands and GIS being a good, useful technology to help with that, versus the ability for it to do 5 different things, including public safety and 911. And sadly, the real operable solution is to create 2 different data sets. And so there is a big struggle in figuring out how do we meet multiple needs with one data set, because it really hurts our GIS hearts to duplicate data sets, right? And diverge data sets and double our maintenance workloads and all the operational reasons why we need to find a solution that can match both needs. So that's a real good example, I think, of the difference between ready and useful too, is that we can get a GIS data set ready for NG911, but can it coexist and be a cohort to the same road centerline data set for other technologies and other end consumers.
Awesome.
Let's see. John said chicken and egg challenge. Yep, that's exactly right. Spend time working in 3D to get your GIS data for call handling equipment, or do you get good data and then move to 3D? it's a good question. Everybody has to figure out on their own what is the real reason. And that kind of goes back to the point that I made on being strategic, is that when opportunity knocks, open the door. Maybe that the chicken needs to come first in the case where there's money to bring the chicken. And you, what do you build the egg? You put the egg around the chicken once you got the egg. But the point being that sometimes there may be a really good reason why it makes sense to go ahead and start off into kind of taking some of your resources away from getting it ready for NG911 in order to build really useful indoor data. While I'm also doing it, I'm just scaling back my readiness efforts, perhaps. Let's see, Ted. What tools would be available for GIS for floor plans and 3D maps? That's a really good question. There are definitely some new tools on the scene. There's traditional GIS tools, right? ArcGIS certainly has some open, there's plenty of open source GIS tools that even specialize in 3D mapping. I know here at Datamark, we're developing a product called Inside, or we have developed it, it's out there. But it is in a massive growth mode, I'll say it that way, that's geared at this very same challenge, is managing indoor mapping data with a 3D perspective. And honestly, I'm not familiar enough with it to tell you if it can handle and manage 3D GIS data per se, but if it doesn't now, it's certainly intended to in the future. And so there are some tools out there that will help you manage, I think, as you say here, Ted, rooms and elevators and stairs as an entity, as opposed to a polygon, a point, or a line. It's rather an entity that kind of can sync all the way to, again, thinking of the extension of ready and useful data, ready data into useful applications. The idea of a digital twin or a building information management system really relates into this discussion as well, right? Where you're managing a room as an entity, and everything about that room comes to that entity in your GIS data or your floor plans, or however that may be.
So Jeff, if I can add to that, our product Inside is capable of managing that data. But one of the things that we always like to talk about before entering anything like that into a system is, what does your existing data look like for inside or for indoors? So what blueprints do you have already? How are you loading that data into the system? What layers do you have that you need to manage within there? So we always like to talk first about, okay, how are you going to get that information? Or how are you going to access that up-to-date information before moving it into any kind of solution?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Stephanie, because that's where the effort can become overwhelming, right? Because now, okay, I've got this idea that I need to go out there and map a bunch of schools to increase, citizen and first responder safety in the event of a terrible emergency at a school building. But the floor plan that I have is from 1982, and we know there's been renovations since, and I just don't have what it is. So maybe I need to send somebody out there to physically walk through and identify where door 1 is, where door 2 is, where Windows 73 on my kids. I drove by my kids' high school the other day, and I noticed that all of a sudden they've stuck up numbers on the exterior of the windows, and I thought, wow, that's really smart. And then I kind of got sad for a second because, wow, that really wasn't necessary when I was a kid. And so it's a state on being, but it probably was the result of somebody going through and saying, hey, we need to have kind of like a common language about this facility, so that when I need you to get on that 4th window off the east side of the building, you know that that's window 13, and you go straight there when you come up and see it. Or whatever that is, right? And so what information do you have irrespective even of data, right? Because most of that data doesn't exist, at least in a GIS format. But what information do you have in the form of paper floor plans or digital floor plans or AutoCAD drawings or PDFs or whatever? And how do I turn that into useful GIS data in order to coalesce this useful future of great indoor maps in an awesome tool and application that shows it in a 3D way that really gives visual context to a first responder, or visual context even to a facility manager who needs to go replace the doorknobs on the front door, right? Or a lock somewhere. It's like a really bright future, but it comes with a lot of work. And so you have to think about what your immediate needs and goals are, and what's the right strategic path for your GIS data to journey on, from being tiger data in the 80s that was really horrible in terms of accuracy and precision, that we added address ranges to it. We've added address points in relationship to those road center lines. Now we're going from the address point into the address polygon, and a different set of polygons for different rooms and buildings and other entities like that. As we move along down the road, as we make that progress, some of our attention gets faded away, and the progress kind of seems to go down a bit. But again, as long as we trend in the right direction of going from really crude data or no data to really crude data to better data to really good data, to extending the types of data that we have so that we can coalesce those into awesome applications that makes everybody's life, safer and better. Well, we're really meeting our goals at that point, aren't we? We're really in that useful zone after we got to the readiness. And so, it's a little bit of a philosophical conversation, and I hope that everybody appreciates that it is that, and not in the weeds of GIS, but rather things that you need to think about in strategery, if you will, in order to make that progress. So that's what I wanted to talk about. I appreciate everybody's input today, and your willingness to chat about these things. And I really want you to know that we love nerding out about these things. And so if you are interested in talking more about what are these useful things, what is the best way to get to that ready state, if your data is in that old tired format and you got a lot of work to do, strategic thinking is something that we, again, pride ourselves on being trusted advisors, and having dealt with many clients. I think it's probably safe to say hundreds of clients across the country that have had these very same challenges, that we can bring our experience and knowledge to bear in a strategic sense for you as well. And so we'd love to pick that conversation up with you at any point. So I'll make myself available. Let me just go to this. Most of you have probably seen this information before, but if you're interested in continuing the conversation in any way, or if you got questions or you think I said something silly, feel free to write me an email, give me a call, and let's make a conversation out of it, because that's just the nerd in me, what I do. So thanks, Stephanie, for the opportunity to share this month's webinar, and I hope it's been useful for everybody.
Thanks, Jeff.